Father, who art in heaven, as a body we congregate in his council chambers for the betterment of our fellow citizens. Lead us that we may do all things well. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, clerk, will you please call the roll?
Present.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Here.
Mr. Schultmeyer. Mr. Culberson. Bob Culberson.
Here.
Mrs. Benninghouse.
Here.
Mrs. Miller.
Here.
Mrs. Housefeld.
Here.
Let the record show all 7 members are present. At this time, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for Treasurer John Ungrew and Lieutenant Bill Ungrew of the Police Department for the passing of their mother this week. Thank you. All right. Members of council, what is your pleasure on the reading of the minutes of the last meeting?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion that we dispense with the reading of the last minutes.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Ms. Housefeld to dispense with the reading of the last minutes. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Members of council, are there any errors or corrections to the minutes as submitted? If not, the minutes will stand as submitted. We'll move to reports of city officials. Mayor, Mr. Stuchel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good evening. Just a reminder that Clean Up St. Bernard Day will be held this Saturday from 9 a.m. to 12 noon. If you're interested in helping, please meet at the parking lot by the lower level of City Hall to get your tongs, gloves, and bags. Also happening this Saturday, summer and fall sports signups and Aquatic Center preseason pass pre-sale will be held at the Aquatic Center on Saturday from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Please stop by to sign up for summer swim lessons, fall say soccer, and lollipop soccer, and purchase your pool passes before we open for the season. The Memorial Day celebration in St. Bernard will be held on Monday, May 31st at 10 a.m. in the parking lot by the lower level of City Hall. Please come out to help honor the veterans from St. Bernard who made the ultimate sacrifice. The law director and I met with a local attorney who specializes in assisting municipalities with charter amendments. We'll be working with this individual to guide us through the process, and we'll be coming back to council with a proposal for a third-party assessment of City Hall and our local government. I'm also asking to be put on the agenda for the next COW to discuss a text change to the zoning code for the Heritage Hill District. Thank you. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Auditor, Ms. Brickwig.
Thank you, Mr. President. First on my list is just to let everybody know that the auditors are finishing up their on-site work tomorrow, and so far everything seems to be going great. Second, on the agenda tonight is Ordinance 12, 2021. It transfers $880,000 from general fund transfer out, with $80,000 going to the swimming pool cash account, $500,000 going to the general bond retirement cash account, and $300,000 going to the employee health care cash account. It also has the following additional appropriations: $100,000 going into tax refunds, $5,000 going into miscellaneous, and $15,000 going into insurance. That money is used so we can pay back the insurance company for the demolition of the work at 404 Jackson. It also includes $35,000 going into the TIF fund expense. The reason is property taxes have gone up, so we're collecting more money, so I have to pay more money back out to the schools. I'd also like to remind Mr. Asbach to please place the 2022 budget to be discussed at the next committee of the whole, and remind everyone that we will be having a public hearing on the 2022 budget before the June 17, 2021 council meeting started at 7 p.m. Thank you, Mr. President. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Director Law, Ms. Van Valkenburg.
Thank you, Mr. President. I met last evening with the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee and members of the public to continue discussions of the current draft Anti-Discrimination Ordinance. We were fortunate enough to have a member of the Emberley Village Human Rights Commission speak to us about that how that commission works. We established a date for a town hall type meeting. One of the things I will be researching in advance of that meeting is whether participants who wish to comment or ask questions will need to identify themselves, such as they have to do at a council meeting. We also briefly discussed the drafting of a transient guest lodging ordinance and some of the concerns the committee would like to see addressed, such as usage permits consistent with zoning, insurance requirements, compliance with building codes, and the possibility of precluding such usage as inconsistent with our residential neighborhood. I'm continuing to review existing ordinances in Ohio and will provide those to the committee members ahead of our next meeting. Additionally, you will have received a copy of Resolution Number 3, 2021. Last week, the representative from JMA addressed the Committee of the Whole about moving forward with applying for no-interest loans to fund planned infrastructure projects if grant monies were unavailable. Mr. Taberky moved for an ordinance to be heard tonight if a review of the enabling resolution suggested an ordinance was needed. In my review, I don't believe an ordinance is needed, as the enabling resolution was broadly worded. However, I have drafted the proposed Resolution 3, 2021 to address any concerns that the previous resolution did not encompass the matter of no-interest loans, and I would ask that the council vote to pass the resolution this evening. Lastly, I would ask that we go into executive session to discuss ongoing litigation matters, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Safety and Service Director, Mr. Toll.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to announce that the Service Department is able to take appliances with refrigerant in them. Remember that safety is first, so if there is an appliance that a child can enter, please remove doors and secure it. To my community, you're all set to live your life to the fullest. Then a twist of fate occurs that alters the way you do things, or perhaps it just does not fit into our plans that we had for ourselves. Many times you hear of tales that make us feel lucky we are who we are until one day it is our tale. Acceptance takes practice, but it can be achieved. Happiness takes practice. It can be achieved. Hopelessness should not be practiced, as that too can be achieved. Love with all your heart. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Tax Commissioner / Administrator, Ms. Helms.
Good evening, everybody. I finally got time to get the April report done. I know it's a little late. So the tax collections for April were $856,377. Tax refunds for April were $56,270.81. The village is up 2.86% in tax revenue from April of 2020. The village is down 7.81% for the first quarter of 2021 versus the first quarter of 2020. $55,380 in delinquent taxes with capital recovery, $103,242 in delinquent taxes with our attorney for judgment garnishment collection work, and $129,990 in delinquent taxes with the Ohio Attorney General's office. This includes tax assessments. Update on the tax filing. I should have all the money and checks in the bank by Friday. I've done nothing but worked on that the last couple days. However, it will not be till the end of June until I can get all the tax returns, including the e-files, processed. I also want to thank everyone who gave the St. Bernard e-file a try. I anticipate that the e-file system will have more features over time. Send me an email if you have any suggestions that I can forward to our software providers. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Reports of standing committees. Finance, Mr. Taberky.
I have no report tonight, but I'd like to make a motion and go to executive session at the end of the meeting for pending litigation.
I'll second that.
Motion by Mr. Taberky, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to go into executive session for pending litigation. Are there any remarks? Clerk, will you please call the roll on the motion?
Mr. Taberky?
Aye.
Mr. Culbertson?
Aye.
Mr. Schultmeyer?
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culberson?
Aye.
Mrs. Benninghaus?
Aye.
Mrs. Miller?
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld?
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Council will go into executive session at the end of the meeting. Safety, Mr. Ray Culbertson.
Thanks, Mr. President. Just another reminder that the next Block Watch meeting will be on Thursday, June 24th at 6:30 p.m. It'll take place in the main level of the municipal building. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Service, Mr. Schultmeyer. Thank you. Public Improvements, Mr. Bob Culbertson.
Thank you, Mr. President. As most of you know, I'm pretty red today. I'd like to congratulate all the 4th, 5th, and 6th graders and the rest of the elementary at St. Bernard on a good field day today. Saw a lot of great teamwork and cheering. So, event well done, and couldn't ask for better weather. Besides that, the next CIC meeting is this Tuesday at 6 o'clock in council chambers. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Laws, Contracts, and Claims, Ms. Bettinghouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. Last evening, 5/19, the Laws, Contracts, and Claims Committee met to further discuss the Anti-Discrimination Ordinance. The main focus of discussion was bringing forward some concerns from some citizens relative to this ordinance, for instance, cost to the village, purpose of the Human Rights Commission, and authority that the Human Rights Commission would have, etc. Next steps. At the CAL meeting on June 10th, the Laws, Contracts, and Claims members and our Law Director, Valerie, will present an overview of the contents of the ordinance. The purpose of the presentation at the CAL meeting is not to get approval to put the ordinance on the docket for the vote at the next council meeting on June 17th, but I just wanted to be able to give council the opportunity to discuss prior to the town hall meeting that is being planned. We are hoping to have the town hall meeting on a Thursday in July. More to come when we have the date and time scheduled. This town hall will be in person and virtual. We are planning on mailing a postcard around 2 weeks prior to the scheduled date as a reminder and a link if you will be attending virtually. Another item that was discussed at the Laws, Contracts, and Claim meeting was relative to Airbnbs in the village and some concerns and questions raised about regulations that the village has regarding Airbnbs. There will be a Laws, Contracts, and Claim Committee meeting on Thursday, June 3rd at 6:30 p.m. in Centennial Hall for further discussion. We would like to have good representation at that meeting of owners of Airbnbs and other citizens that would like to understand rules and regulations relative to them. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Marketing, Ms. Miller.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will be sending out an email to gather newsletter submissions for the June 2021 newsletter on Monday, May 24th. This concludes my report.
Thank you. Business and Industry, Ms. Hausfeld.
No report, Mr. President.
Thank you. Committee of the Whole, Ms. Catherine, has been. Thank you. To Council and Administration. I knew what you meant. All right. Clerk, are there any communications this evening?
No,
Nope. All right. If not, could you give the first reading of Resolution Number 3, 2021?
Mr. President,
Mr. Berkey.
first make a motion to put resolution 3 on the table.
Since we made the motion to put
For
the
an
ordinance on
ordinance.
it and she switched it, should we still
Okay.
do a,
Just to cover our rear.
go ahead, Mr. DeBerky.
Make a motion to put resolution 3, 2021 on the table tonight.
Second that.
Motion by Mr. DeBerky, second by Ms. Bettinghouse to place Resolution Number 3, 2021 on the table. Are there any remarks? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? So ordered. Now you may read Resolution Number 3, please.
Resolution number 3, 2021. A resolution authorizing the Village of St. Bernard to prepare and submit applications to participate in the Ohio Public Works Commission State Capital Improvement and/or local transportation improvement programs, and to execute contracts as required and declare an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of Resolution Number 3, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of Resolution Number 3, 2021.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld to suspend with the second and third reading of Resolution Number 3, 2021. Are there any remarks? If not, clerk, will you call the roll on suspension?
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmeyer. Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption of Resolution 3?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to adopt Resolution Number 3, 2021.
Second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt Resolution Number 3, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerky.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culberson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmeyer. Mr. Bob Culberson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Thank
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Resolution Number 3, 2021 is adopted as read. All right, clerk, will you please give the first reading of Ordinance Number 11, 2021?
Ordinance number 11, 2021. An ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as part of the various components codes of the codified ordinance of St. Bernard, Ohio, revising the traffic and general offensive codes to comply with state law and to declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 11, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 11, 2021.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Housefeld to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 11, 2021. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 11, 2021? Not clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar. Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 11, 2021.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance number 11, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar. Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 11, 2021 is adopted as read. Clerk, could you please give the first reading of ordinance number 12, 2021?
Authorizing and directing the auditor to transfer funds and provide additional appropriations and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 12, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 12, 2021.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Housefeld to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 12, 2021. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 12? Not clerk, will you please call the roll on the motion to suspend?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar.
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 12, 2021.
Second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance number ordinance number 12, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar.
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 12, 2021 is adopted as read. All right, clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance 13, 2021?
Ordinance number 13, 2021. An ordinance approving the memorandum of understanding between the Village of St. Bernard, Ohio, and the St. Bernard Service Department Association and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 13, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 13, 2021.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. a motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Housefeld to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 13, 2021. Are there any remarks? Not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 13? Not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. DeBerke.
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar.
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse?
I make a motion to adopt ordinance number 13, 2021.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, seconded by Mr. Ray Culbertson to adopt ordinance 13, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. DeBerke.
No.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmar.
Aye.
Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
6 ayes, 1 nay, motion carries. Ordinance number 13, 2021 is adopted as read. Clerk, will you please give the first reading of ordinance number 14, 2021?
Ordinance number 14, 2021, accepting and approving the terms of employment agreed upon by and between the Village of St. Bernard and local number 450 St. Bernard Firefighters Union, LAFF, and declaring an emergency.
Members of council, you've excuse me. Members of council, you've heard the first reading of ordinance number 14, 2021. What is your pleasure?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
I make a motion to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 14, 2021.
I'll second that, Mr. President.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Ms. Hausfeld, to suspend with the second and third reading of ordinance number 14, 2021. Are there any remarks? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council on ordinance 14? If not, clerk, will you please call the roll on suspension?
Mr. Taberky,
Aye.
Mr. Culverson,
Aye.
Mr. Schultmeyer. Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Mrs. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Members of council, what is your pleasure on adoption?
Mr. President,
Ms. Bettinghouse.
make a motion to adopt ordinance number 14, 2021.
I'll second that.
A motion by Ms. Bettinghouse, second by Mr. Ray Culbertson, to adopt ordinance 14, 2021. Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Mr. Taberky,
Aye.
Mr. Ray Culverson.
Aye.
Mr. Schultmeyer. Mr. Bob Culverson.
Aye.
Mrs. Bettinghouse.
Aye.
Ms. Miller.
Aye.
Ms. Hausfeld.
Aye.
7 ayes, no nays, motion carries. Ordinance number 14, 2021 is adopted as read. This time, does anyone on council have anything under old business?
Mr. President,
Mr. Taberky.
well, the fire chief's here, and Peggy might be able to answer. Have we started billing Elmwood for the paramedic runs?
Yes,
Okay.
we did.
We gotten paid yet?
We just dropped off, we just dropped off the first invoice.
The first invoice was delivered. It was written on the 15th. They have 30 days for the contract to pay that bill. So I'll let you know in 30 days.
How much was it for, you know?
$10,850. There was 31 EMS runs made that were billable in April. And we're at 26 through today for this month.
Did any of those runs cause overtime in the fire department?
I'm sure it did, yeah. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm sure they did, yeah. Because if we go below 6 and we call folks in. So I'm sure some of those would have caused overtime. But that was that's figured into the numbers that we use for billing. That's kind of the purpose of the billing.
Anyone else under old business? Does anyone on council have anything under new business? If not, is there anyone in the audience wishing to address council this evening? All right, if not, before we go into executive session, the next committee of the whole meeting will be Thursday, June 10th at 7 p.m. And then the following week will be the council meeting on Thursday, June 17th at 7 p.m. And as Ms. Brickwick said earlier, we will begin the meeting with a public hearing on the 2022 proposed budget. At this time, council will go into executive session to discuss pending litigation, and we will return as soon as we can. All right, council met in executive session to discuss pending litigation. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. President,
Mr. Ray Culbertson.
make a motion, we adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Ray Culbertson, seconded by Mr. Bob Culbertson to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned.